Hi there, my name is Oliver. Tonight I will be reading chapters 7, 8, and 9 from The Sword and the Chain, Book 2 of the trilogy Guardians of the Flame, The Warriors. In these chapters we find Karl, Ahira, and the freed slaves in the beginning stages of a war between themselves and the collective might of the slaving guilds of the world. They will leave behind their idyllic refuge in the valley, for its safety and that of their families, and venture out. Let's get started. Chapter 7. Moving On. Now hollow fires burn out to black, and lights are guttering low. Square your shoulders, lift your pack, and leave your friends and go. Alfred Edward Hoseman. It was a clear night. Andy lying still beside him, Karl stared up at the dome of stars. Down slope from them, halfway between them and the palisade wall, little Aya huddled in her blankets, asleep at last. It had been a rocky night for the girl, filled with bad dreams and loud screams. If there is a hell, Ormist, you are surely there. Andy, he whispered. Yes? He quirked a smile. She hadn't been sleeping either. I've got to leave, for a while. She sucked air through her teeth, then rolled over on her side, facing him. She stroked his forehead with gentle fingers. I know. You're worried about Pandathaway. Not worried. Terrified. If I stay here too long, I'm not just endangering myself. He patted her barely distended belly. There's others involved, too. Like Karl, Jr.? She grinned at him. Even if it is a boy, we're not naming him after me. With a mother as pretty as you, he'll have enough of an Oedipus problem without saddling him with his father's name. Besides, it's probably a girl. It will be a boy, Karl. Her face grew somber. We women know about these things. Bullshit, he snorted. I think we know each other a bit too well for you to give me that sort of nonsense. We do know about these things, she said, shrugging. And we're right about, 50% of the time. Funny. Very funny. But you're changing the subject. Or trying to. I'm starting to get fat, is that it? You're going to run off and find some 16-year-old... Hush. He put a finger to her lips. Hush. Not even in jest. Please. A long pause. How long will you be gone? Don't know for sure. 6 months at a minimum. Maybe closer to a year. When? She asked, her voice a low whisper. 'Twere best done quickly. In a day or two, I think. It won't take long to pack. I don't know if you've noticed, but Jack's getting itchy. And so are you. There was more truth in that than he cared to admit. No, it's not that. But this vacation has gone on long enough. It's time to get back to work. She rolled onto her back and stared up at the sky, her head pillowed on her hands. Slicing up people. Some work. Slicing up slavers. Or, if you want to be more accurate, my work is murdering slavers. But it isn't the words that matter, Andrea. You know that. Please, Andy, don't ever let the blood come between us. Please. She sighed deeply, and then closed her eyes. She lay quietly for so long that Karl began to wonder if she had fallen back asleep. Who are you taking with you? Well, Chalk, for one. He's seen more of the Aran regions than any of the rest of us, and he's pretty handy with a sword. Besides, he rankles at taking orders from anyone except me. I'm not leaving a time bomb behind. I'd like to take Elegon, but he's just too conspicuous. And he's also the most deadly being I know. He stays here and keeps an eye on my wife and unborn child. I am honored, of course, but I will miss you, Karl. Don't do something stupid and get yourself killed. Please? Just as a favor to you. Thanks. Who else? She asked, a decided edge to her voice. Well, I can't take Walter. Not this time. Somebody's got to run the farm. And if I did take him along, I'd never know whether it was because I wanted him along, or because I didn't trust both of you enough to leave him here. I think I'll invite Ahira to come along. He'll want to go. He's just as good in a fight as I am. Better. And he's got a fine strategical sense. His dark side might come in handy. It's even better than Elegon's.
How's he going to take your being in charge, Karl?
Huh? Who said anything about...
As Walter would say, think it through. You've always thought he was too conservative, too eager to avoid a fight. So you're going to let him be in charge when you're going out looking for trouble?
He snorted. We'll work it out. And what we're doing is too important to let who's in charge games screw it up. And
I don't recall your mentioning my name.
He snorted. Don't be silly.
Silly?
This isn't a time for reflex pseudo-feminism. We're going to be gone for 6 months at least. If you think I'm going to let a woman at term bounce along on the back of a horse, try thinking again. Case closed. You stay here where it's safe.
Always the diplomat, Karl. She dismissed the issue with a wave of her hand. But I guess you're right. It's just going to be you, Chuck, and Ahira?
Can't expect any of the new people to do any good in a fight. The best is Fjolt, and he wouldn't last 10 seconds against a real swordsman. On the other hand, he's trying hard to learn. If he wants in, he's got it. Chetan, Kira, Eric, and he are happy here, or I'd escort them somewhere safe. Tenedy, though.
Tenedy wouldn't be happy anywhere.
Exactly. But she's hot to kill some slavers. I can't say as I blame her. She can come along if she wants to, which she will.
Is that all?
She frowned.
It sounds like an awfully small group.
It is, but I think it's the best one for now. I may as well get it over with. There's one more person we're taking along, Andy.
Karl, you are not taking Aya.
We're taking her home. He shrugged. Might as well swing through Melloway. The hunting should be good. There have been slaving raids all along that coast.
Mainly by sea, according to Chuck. To the best of his knowledge, Ormist had been the only slaver to try the difficult overland route to Melloway. Question: how does one take on a slaver's ship?
Answer very carefully. Do you have any more stupid questions?
No. No, Andy said, echoing his response to Elegon. You can't. She's getting used to being around us. She'll adjust. I'll take care of her.
We're not her family, Andrea. She's been through hell. You should know that better than I do. Let's let her grow up in her own country, with her own people.
Andy sat up, angrily pulling the blankets around her. What good did they do her? Tell me, her people let her get caught by slavers. Raped, Karl. You can't take her back to them. I won't let you.
He tried to put his hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged his arm away. Shall we leave it up to her? He asked.
She's too young to decide. She needs someone to take care of her.
She looked away from him, toward where Aya slept. Like you?
Yes, she hissed. Like me. Don't you think I'm good enough to take care of her? Don't you?
He shook his head. No, I don't.
Her head spun around. You bastard. Tears filled her eyes.
Andy, it's not that there's anything wrong with you. The thing of it is this. She's a little girl. Somewhere she has family. And they probably miss her as much as she misses them.
She sneered. Just as our families back home will be missing us? You didn't seem so worried about that.
Different case. For one thing, we're adults. We have to make our own decisions. For another, with the time differential between here and home, the fact that we're gone hasn't even been noticed yet. At home, we've only been gone a few hours. But, again, you're dodging the issue. Think about this. If someone stole little whatever her name is from you, you'd want her back.
He laid a palm on her belly.
Wouldn't you? Or would you think that some stranger could take better care of her?
She didn't answer for a long time. Then, leave it alone, Karl. You're right, as usual. Bastard. She daubed at her eyes with a corner of the blanket. "But it's going to be a boy." Gathering her robes about her, she rose and walked down the slope toward where Ea lay sleeping. She seated herself beside the girl and took one of Ea's small hands in both of hers, and sat there, watching her, until the night fled and the sun sat above the treetops. Part 3. The Middle Lands. Chapter 8. Armin. Revenge is a dish that tastes best when eaten cold. Sicilian proverb. The windowless room was dark and musty, redolent with the smells of aging paper and parchment. The only illumination was a single overhead lamp. In a dark corner, a tall brass censer burned, sending vague fingers of smoke feeling their way into the air. His eyes stung. Armin repressed a shudder. He never liked being near wizards at all, but it was even worse to confront one on the wizard's own territory. That was one thing his father had always said. Stay away from the wizard, son, whenever you can. In Armin's 19 years, he had never seen a reason to doubt that advice. He stood motionless in the middle of the blood-red carpet, not daring to interrupt Wenthel's unblinking study of the crystal ball. Though why the thing was called a ball was something Armin couldn't understand. The ball was a head-sized crystal model of a human eye, the iris and pupil etched on its front, complete down to a spoke that projected from the back, to symbolize the cords that connected the eye to the brain. The fat wizard gripped the spoke as he held the crystal before him, staring at the backside of the ball, as if he were sitting behind a giant's eye, looking out through it. Finally, he shook his head, sighed deeply, then carefully set the ball down on a wooden stand before turning to Armin. "Good. I see you received my summons." "Yes, sir." "Why me? I'm just barely a journeyman. If you have a need for my guild, why not send for a master?" He didn't say that. Slaver's guildmaster Yurin had spent most of his tenure trying to improve the often uneasy relations between the Slavers' Guild and the Wizards' Guild, and was known to have little patience with any apprentice or journeyman who did anything to offend wizards. If the apprentice or journeyman survived. The rapprochement between the slavers and the wizards, while tentative, had paid well. It had opened up both Thurange and Melloway for frequent slaving raids. The wizard's guildmaster was thought to be lukewarm about the loose alliance. Yurin tolerated no action that might change that indifference to opposition. Wenthel walked to a water bowl and splashed water on his face, drying his black beard with his gray robes. "You recall that there is a reward out for the one who stole our sewer dragon?" he said, seating himself on a stool, his hands folded over his bulging belly. "Of course." Despite himself, Armin voiced it almost as a question. After all, the reward had gone unclaimed for more than a year. Undoubtedly the culprit was dead somewhere, or had fled the Aran regions, past the range of even Wizard Guildmaster Lucius's location spells. "But hunting dragons isn't something I can do, Master Wenthel. I don't have that kind of experience, even if there are any small ones left." The wizard's eyes flashed. "Just listen, fool. I do not want you to hunt a dragon. You and I have further grievances against the one who freed our sewer dragon. The same one believed responsible for the deaths of both Blenrith, of my order, and Ullman, of yours." "Ullman?" That had to mean no, it was impossible. "But Karl Cullinane has to be dead, or must have fled the region at least, sir. None of you wizards has been able to locate him." Wenthel rose to his feet, sighing. He walked over to a scroll rack set into the nearest wall. "There is one other possibility," the wizard said, rummaging through the scrolls, finally selecting one. He unrolled it. It was a well-worn map of the entire Aran region. He could have been in the one place in the region that is protected from both the erratic sight of my crystal ball and my more reliable spells of direction. And a message I've received from Lord Mellon of Matrail suggests that must be the case. He was... The wizard tapped a spot on the map. "There.
The home tabernacle of the Healing Hand Society. That is where Cullinane hid. He is not there right now, but he has been, protected by the Hand."
"You're certain?"
"Yes," Wenthel hissed. "I am certain. I haven't been able to see him with the ball, but there is no doubt that Karl Cullinane is alive, boy. He is alive. Look." Puffing from the exertion, the wizard reached up to a high shelf and brought down a chamois-wrapped parcel, almost a foot high. He unwrapped it carefully before gently setting it down on a table. A baked clay statue of a bearded man, holding a long sword. Armin looked closer. The statue was incredibly detailed, down to individual hairs carved into the head. "Karl Cullinane?" "Karl Cullinane." Wenthel rewrapped the statue and put it away. Then, from the folds of his robe, he produced a strange device, a hollow glass sphere the size of his fist, containing a murky yellow oil. "Look here." Reluctantly moving closer, Armin peered into it. A mummified finger floated in the sphere's center. The finger had been messily severed from its owner's hand. A shard of bone projected from its hacked-off end, and shreds of skin and tendon waved slowly as it floated. Walking quickly to a compass on its stand in the corner of the room, the wizard took a sighting. "He's moved again. Not far, but south and west. Still south and west."
"Your pardon, Master Wenthel, but I don't understand."
For a moment the wizard's nostrils flared. "Stupid little—" He stopped himself. "Never mind. Listen closely. This device works like a location spell. After much effort, I have managed to attune it to the body of Karl Cullinane." As the wizard slowly spun the sphere in the palm of his age-withered hand, the dismembered finger maintained its position, pointing unerringly to the southeast. "Too much effort. Getting that statue accurate enough for the spell to work was the most precise, most finicky work I've had to do in 10 years. But never mind that. As long as Cullinane remains within range, this will show you in which direction he is. If, as you turn the ball, the finger fails to point consistently in one direction, there are 4 possible explanations. First, he has fled the Aran regions. Second, he is inside the Hand Sanctuary. Wenthel grimaced. Third, he is otherwise magically protected. Or last, the wizard said, smiling thinly, he is dead.
Will it tell me where he is? Not just the direction, but how far?
Yes, Wenthel nodded, but only indirectly. The sphere disappeared in the folds of his cloak. 2 quick strides brought the wizard across the room. He shuffled through a pile of papers and parchment on his desk and produced a map of the Aran regions, spreading it out on a low table. We know, he said, picking up a charstick, that he is in this direction. But where on this line? Wenthel shrugged, then drew a solid line that stretched from Pandathway into the Middle Lands, through Holtun and Biem, into Nephian and beyond. We can't be certain, and there is no way of knowing, at any given moment, whether he is moving or stationary. The device is not as precise as we would wish. That could be critical. Were he on his way to Eric, your task would be easy. Were he traveling to Thurange, it would be more difficult. Your guild is not in the good graces of the Western Thurangi these days.
True.
Armin smiled. Slave-taking raids did have a way of making one's guild unpopular with the locals. But I have been tracking his progress for the past 10 days. It seems he is traveling through the Middle Lands, possibly bound for Evanor.
Evanor, Master Wenthel. Could he have dealings in Faerie?
That seems unlikely, the wizard said, scowling. It's too risky for humans, particularly normals. But there are other reasons for going to Evanor besides trying to beg passage into Faerie, as you should know, slaver.
Melloway. He's bound for Melloway.
But why? There were only 2 reasons for traveling to Melloway: Copra and slaves. Neither seemed to apply to Karl Cullinane. Quite possibly, Wenthel said, but possibly not. It's conceivable he has dealings in the Middle Lands. I suggest you begin by taking passage to Lundale, here. He tapped the map. "Take another sighting with both ball and compass. If Cullinane hasn't moved, the two lines will intersect at his location. Now," the wizard raised his finger, "if ever you do lose him, you can use that technique to locate him precisely. In any case, from Lundale you can take the southern route through the Erstills, if he is still in the Middle Lands. There is a land route to Melloway. That could be his intention. If so, you should be able to beat him there by ship, no?" "Certainly, Master Wendell. The overland route is said to be very difficult." "Fine. I will speak to your guildmaster later today. See him before you leave Pandathaway. He will give you a writing that will allow you to commandeer a raiding ship, if, that is, Cullinane is bound for Melloway." "Perhaps he'll take ship to Melloway." "I could catch him at sea, if the Flail or Scourge are in Lundaport." "Perhaps." The wizard extended his hand, the sphere cradled in his palm. "Treat this device carefully. It is the product of far more time and effort than I would like to recall. A finger from a freshly killed maiden elf is difficult to obtain these days." Accepting the proffered sphere, Armin nodded grimly. "I'll find him, sir, and bring him back to you," he said. He started to turn away, but caught himself. No, his father wouldn't have wanted him to leave it at just that. By profession, slavers were supposed to be cold and bloodless. "The reward still stands. There will be expenses for this, Master Wendell. I'll have to hire a team, and if I commandeer a ship in Lundale, I'll have to pay the seamen's wages. That is the law, Master." The wizard chuckled thinly. "Quite your father's son, eh? Very well. The reward is doubled. Trebled if you bring him back alive." The wizard smiled. "I have a use for his skin, but it must be taken while he lives." Despite himself, Armin shuddered. But he forced a smile and a nod. "You will have it, sir, I swear." With a deep bow, he turned and left the wizard's room. So Karl Cullinane was alive and well. Probably, Cullinane often snickered over killing Ullman. He wouldn't be snickering soon. "You killed Ullman, Karl Cullinane. You shouldn't have killed my father." Chapter 9. Baron Fernale. When we are planning for posterity, we ought to remember that virtue is not hereditary. Thomas Paine. "Relatively speaking, I'm beginning to like the Middle Lands," Ahira said, looking up at Karl from the back of his dappled pony. "BM in particular." "Relatively speaking," Karl answered, tired. Ahira nodded. "We've seen a few slaves, but neither slavers nor whips. By local standards, this isn't bad." "By local standards." Ahira snorted. "What are you today, a Greek chorus? Like you and Slavotsky in Chem?" Karl laughed. "I didn't know you knew about that." "Walter told me. Swore me to silence until the statute of limitations runs out. Not that it matters anymore." His smile faded. "What's bothering you?" "A touch of homesickness, I think." "You miss Andrea?" "Yes, but actually I was thinking about home, not the valley home." Karl loosened his tunic to scratch at his ribs. "I think I'd trade a finger for a bar of Lifebuoy, or a pound of Kenya AA coffee, or a case of toilet paper. Hell, even for a pizza." "You complain too much. Why let it get to you? At least we're not camping out every damn night, for now. The beds may not be posturpedics, but they are soft." Karl nodded. The dwarf had a point. In the 40 days of traveling since they had left the valley and worked their way into the Middle Lands, they had gone through some hard times. Not dangerous, particularly. The only slaver caravan they had run across had been easy pickings, so much so that Karl didn't consider the encounter a proper shakedown for Fjaalt and Tenedy. The slavers hadn't even bothered to set out a watchman. The late slavers. Karl had been able to send 17 former slaves toward the valley, one of them carrying a letter to Andy. He hadn't worried that the group might not find the valley. As long as they passed nearby, Elegon would be flying watch at night. Once the dragons spotted them and flew close enough to read their minds, they would be met and guided in. No danger there, not for anyone. The closest Karl and the rest had come to real danger was when Fjolt accidentally slashed Kennedy across the belly during a fencing lesson. 2 quickly administered healing drafts had taken care of that. A switch to wooden swords for training purposes ensured that they wouldn't again have to use up more of their small supply of expensive healing drafts for that sort of accident. It wasn't the danger that bothered Karl. It was the drudgery. Moving camp every day had been fun during the summer, when Karl's scout troop had gone up to Manitoba to canoe down the Assiniboine. But part of the fun of that had been knowing that the primitive lifestyle was temporary, that hot showers, clean clothes, fast food, and air conditioning awaited them at the end of their trip. But that wasn't true here. The endless grind of stopping to camp, finding firewood, lighting a fire with flint and steel, cooking, cleaning pots and pans with dirt clods, pitching their tents, watering the horses, breaking camp in the morning, all of it had started to wear on him, bringing him almost to the breaking point. Perhaps crossing the border from Niflheim into Biem hadn't saved his sanity, but sometimes it felt like it. Biem was possibly the oldest of the Middle Lands. Certainly it was the best developed. Tilled by dray horses and oxen, the farmland produced an abundance of grains and legumes, 1/10 of the fields lying fallow under strict rotation. The productivity of the land and its people had brought both wealth and trade to Biem. Grain sellers and hostlers came from as far away as the Cathard and Lundale to do business there. Few armsmen were evident, and then only singly, or in small groups. They functioned primarily as a constabulary, rather than a standing army. While there was no love lost between Thurange and any of the Middle Lands, an attack on Biem would have to go through one of the surrounding principalities first, giving the Biemi ample time to prepare. There was no need to have a large, non-productive soldier class standing by, although all free farmers were required to produce a well-honed sword for inspection on 2 different holidays each year. The best thing, though, was the inns along the main thoroughfare. By law, each community of 500 or more along the Prince's Road had to sponsor a well-kept inn. The high standards maintained through frequent inspections by the local baron's armsmen, where there was a local baron, and infrequent but potentially more penalty-bearing ones by the princes. Throughout most of the Prince's Road, the village inns were no more than a day's ride apart. In the few places where villages were more widely spaced, there still was an inn, directly supported by the crown, and the Prince's inns were the most luxurious and least expensive of all. "There's a trick to all this," Karl said, as he reined in Carrot, forcing her to keep close to the rest of the group. "Easy, girl." He stroked the rough hair on her neck. She was still dry, even after half a day's ride. His only complaint about her was her tendency to go at her own quick pace, her sneering disdain for the slower pace of the other horses. "A trick?" Karl nodded. "Remember Kiar? That inn with the marble floors? Not quite as lush as the Inn of Quiet Repose, but a nice place." The dwarf nodded. "This sour beer isn't all that good, but that cook really knew how to use it as a marinade. Although," he added under his breath, "I guess I do miss some things from home. I'd kill for a Genesee, or a Miller, or even a Schlitz." Karl raised an eyebrow. "Kill?" Ahira shrugged. "Well, maim. I really do love a good beer. Don't remember you being much of a beer drinker back home." Ahira frowned. "I had to be careful about when I drank. It used to really start my kidneys going." Karl shot a glance over his shoulder. That had become a reflex, and one he didn't intend to give up, even in the relative safety of the Prince's Road. But there was no problem. Kennedy, Fjolt, and Ea rode behind, Chak bringing up the rear. The little man favored him with a friendly nod and a slight, open-handed wave. "So?" Karl asked. "Beer does that to everyone." Ahira chuckled. "You're forgetting." He raised a thick arm and flexed it, the chainmail tightening around his biceps. "I wasn't just anyone. Muscular dystrophy, remember?" "I know, but—" "What does that have to do with it?" "Karl, I couldn't go to the John by myself. Couldn't even lift myself out of my wheelchair and onto the toilet. Going out for a drink with the guys wasn't something I could do, unless I had my roommate/attendant with me, to drag me off to the bathroom. I used to envy the hell out of the way all the rest of you were so mobile." You don't anymore.
Well, no, the dwarf said, unconvincingly. Karl nodded to himself. There was something he had that Ahira didn't, and that was the memory of always being sound of body, of being able to take for granted something as trivial as going out for a few beers. As if he were reading his mind, Ahira cocked an eyebrow. Let's leave it alone. What cannot be cured. You were talking about the inns?
Right, Karl said. There's a trick here. If you notice, a lot of the inns were originally built by the crown. Back in Kiar, they'd taken down the prince's coat of arms, but the outline was still on the stone. A prince built it, and supported it for a while. And then? People moved nearby, probably got a good deal from the prince on the land, and such. The crown brought in a cleric, probably sponsored a smith or two. Cute. And then, when the population was large enough, the prince gave the territory to a baron, and made the locals support the inn. Right. Karl nodded. At least, that's the way I read it. And if it had worked that way, it spoke well for the local form of government, despite Karl's admitted bias against feudalism. There was nothing wrong with a bit of economic encouragement. It was coercion that was the problem with feudal societies. Ahira considered it for a moment. Possible. And it's not as oppressive around here as we've seen elsewhere. That why you haven't signaled for a fight? Karl shook his head. No, that wasn't it at all. The plan didn't call for them to attack every slave owner they ran into. That would quickly result in their being buried under a flood of bodies. Anyone who either owned a slave, wanted to own a slave, or had owned a slave would see them as the enemy. Attacking slavers was different. Outside of the markets, slavers were unpopular. Locals always knew that in a slaver's eye, everyone was potential merchandise. No, he said. We fight slavers, and in self-defense. Liberally construed. Ahira threw back his head and laughed, like the way you and Walter decided that attacking Ormist was self-defense. Well, it felt like self-defense. Karl dismissed the subject with an airy wave. He stood in the saddle and turned, raising his head. Jack.
Yes, Karl?
Where are we stopping tonight?
Fernail. Jack dropped his reins to rub his hands together. Best inn in the Middle Lands. We might even meet Baron Fernail himself. Kennedy snorted. What a thrill.
Time for some practice. Fjolt, Kennedy, Karl said, gesturing at them to follow him out of the common room and into the courtyard.
Chak was ready. He had the bag of practice swords slung over his shoulder. Ahira yawned and stretched. I'm going to get some sleep. See you folks in the room. Aya put down her rag doll and lifted her head. Me too?
Well...
Please, Karl? You didn't let me last time. Please?
He smiled down at her as he nodded genially, then gently rubbed his fingers through her hair.
Sure.
Sure, little one. I'll be the gracious father substitute and teach you a bit more about how to disembowel a rapist. Goddamn world. An 11-year-old girl should be thinking about dolls and boys and stuff like that.
Let's go.
Wordlessly, Chak followed, carrying the canvas bag of wooden swords. The courtyard of the Fernail Inn was a large open square, surrounded by the windowed walls of the inn proper. Slate flagstones checkered the ground, well-trimmed clumps of grass separating them. Heavy with fruit, evenly spaced orange trees dotted the courtyard. Karl unbuckled his sword and hung it on a low branch, then reached up and pulled down a couple of oranges, tossing one to Chak, before quartering the other with his belt knife. Nothing for the other three. They would get theirs later, as a reward for a good session, if at all. He ate quickly, not minding that some of the juice dripped down his chin. The fruit was cool and sweet. He tossed the peels to Chak, who stashed them under the equipment bag.
Now,
he said, wiping the remaining juice and pulp from his chin.
We're going to start with a bit of hand-to-hand today.
Karl slipped out of his jerkin and unlaced his sandals, stripping down to breechclout and leggings. It promised to be a hot session. He slipped out of his leggings, awkwardly balancing on each foot alternately. Already down to his breechclout, Chak hung up his sword and nodded. This ki-oho-koshinki stuff of yours?
Kyoko Shinkai, and yes.
Good. Chak nodded his approval. Fjolt frowned, rubbing a finger through his salt and pepper beard.
Rather do swords,
he said, which was for Fjolt being unusually talkative. Kennedy recoiled in mock horror, and probably a bit of real disgust. Not around me. Not even with a wood sword. Liable to put my eye out while you're trying for a thrust to the kneecap.
Fjolt, Chak said. You'll do swords with me later, after Karl's done with you.
He shot a grin at Karl.
I'll make him sweat a bit more.
Karl nodded. When it came to fencing, Chak was the better teacher. There was a good reason. Karl had gained his skills with a sword as part of the transfer to this world. He'd never had to go through the long hours of learning. There was no deliberate method to his swordplay. His arm and wrist just did it, as of their own volition. A gain? Well, yes, his instantly acquired fencing skills had saved his life on more than one occasion. But it was a loss, too. He'd never had the experience of learning, of knowing how to improve his skills. While he had run into only one swordsman more adept than himself, there were undoubtedly others. The loss went beyond his inability to teach. Without knowing how to learn sword fighting, his skills were frozen at their present level. He would never get better.
Guess I'll have to live with it.
But with his karate skills, there was the possibility of improvement, enhanced by the innate agility, balance, and reflexes of his body on this side. Here, he could have easily won enough in competitions, if they had competitions here, to qualify for a brown belt. Back home, the best he had been able to do was green.
Loosen up first, Karl said, breaking into a series of bends and stretches.
The others followed his example. Working out without first warming up was an invitation to wrenched muscles and torn tendons. After his joints and tendons stopped protesting and settled down to a nice, quiet ache, he straightened.
Enough. Let's start.
Kennedy, Fjolt, and Ea lined up opposite him, bowing Japanese style, their eyes always on his. Karl returned their bows. Were the traditional customs irrelevant here? He wondered. Not for the first time. Possibly. Quite possibly the customs of the Japanese dojo were out of place. Probably they had been silly back home. Probably it would be easier for him to use simple or compound arendra names for punches, kicks, blocks, and strikes. But the traditions seemed to have worked back home. There was no sense in violating custom without a compelling reason.
Sanchin Dachi,
he said, swinging his right foot past and slightly in front of his left, and planting his feet a shoulder width apart. Toes canted slightly in. Sanchin Dachi was the best practicing stance for strikes and punches, as well as snap kicks. Not necessarily the best fighting stance. Karl had always favored Zenkutsu Dachi, a split-legged, forward-leaning stance, but a natural one that could be assumed without triggering a violent response.
We'll start with a few seiken.
Chudan-tsuki, sensei? Chak asked, as he took his position at the end of the line, next to Kennedy.
Fine. Start with your right hand.
As always, he began by demonstrating. Seiken Chudan-tsuki, a punch to the midsection, began with the non-punching hand extended outward, as though it had just been used to block. The punching hand pulled back, the fist inverted, resting at his side just under the pectorals. He moved slowly, pulling his left hand back as he brought his right hand out, turning his wrist so that the back of his hand faced upward, tensing his entire body just at the moment that the blow would have made contact, had there been a real opponent.
And now the left.
He demonstrated, then dropped his hands.
Now, on my count. Seiken Chudentsuki. Groups of 4.
He moved closer to them.
1. Keep it slow now. Follow the pace. 2. Better. 3. 4. Speed it up a bit now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Full speed, just as if it were for real. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep going.
Chak was doing it properly, as usual, his stance easy. He punched smoothly, his arms moving like greased pistons. Karl passed behind the little man and moved to help Kennedy.
No, keep your wrist straight, he said, adjusting her hand. Better. A bit more tensing of the belly when you strike. Don't rise to the balls of your feet. Flat-footed blows have much more power. He moved on to Fjolt. Fjolt was still throwing the shoulder of his striking arm forward. Standing in front of him, Karl reached out and grasped his shoulders. Try it now. Ignore me. With Karl's much longer reach, Fjolt's punch wouldn't land. Fjolt punched the air in front of him, pushing his shoulder forward against Karl's hand. No good, Karl said. You've got to keep the shoulder steady. Chuck? Not the knives again. The little man frowned. Knives, again. Tenedy, Ea, keep it up. Chalk walked over to the tree where his clothes and equipment hung and drew two of his belt knives, tossing them hilt first to Karl. Karl caught them, then rested the knife points gently against Fjolt's shoulders. Now try it. Fjolt scowled and punched timidly. That was better. At least your shoulders didn't move. But, Karl said, increasing the pressure of the knives against Fjolt's shoulders, you didn't have any force behind the blow. Wouldn't have squashed a bug. Do it right now. Still a timid punch. Do it better, or I swear I'll stick you, he said, just as his karate teacher had once said to him. Karl wondered for a moment if Mr. Katsuwahara had been lying, and dismissed the notion as blasphemous. This time Fjolt struck properly, his shoulders rock steady, his body tensing at the moment of impact. Nice. Karl nodded, handing the knives back to Chuck. He turned towards Ea, and Fjolt struck, a perfectly executed Seiken Chudansuki that landed just below Karl's solar plexus, knocking him back. Blindly, Karl brought his right arm around to block Fjolt's second blow, then swung his right leg into a fast but gentle roundhouse kick that bowled Fjolt over. Very pretty, a voice called from the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Karl glanced up. A man stood, looking down at them, his hands spread on the balcony rail. Chuck, handle it. Karl jerked his thumb in the direction of the voice as he stooped to help Fjolt up. Nicely done, Fjolt. Fjolt's grizzled face broke into a smile. I did it right? Very. You hit me legally, and hit me hard. If you'd really been aiming here, Karl tapped himself on the solar plexus, you would have had me. He clapped a hand on Fjolt's shoulder. Keep it up, and we'll make a warrior of you yet. Just a man who can protect himself and his own. That's all I ask. Fjolt nodded grimly. That's all. I said, very pretty, sir. And who are you? Ger, Baron Fernale, sir. He bowed. May I join you? At Karl's nod, Fernale walked back into the building, reappearing just a few moments later at the door into the garden, two armsmen and an old man in grey wizard's robes at his side. Baron Fernale was a tall man in his early 50s, perhaps an inch or so over 6 feet. Despite his age, he seemed to be in good shape. His thick wrists were heavily muscled. His leggings bulged with well-developed calves and thighs. Only a small potbelly puffed out the front of his leather tunic. Fernale's face was deeply lined, and stubble-free enough to suggest that he shaved himself both carefully and frequently, or else had someone else shave him. On his upper lip, a pencil-thin mustache was heavily streaked with gray, although his short-cropped hair was as black as a raven. Karl kept his chuckle to himself. That bespoke a bit of vanity. But why hadn't Fernale dyed the mustache, too? A bit of self-honesty? Or was it just whatever dye they used here would have stained his lip? Baron. Karl bowed slightly, Fjolt, Tenedy, and Chak following suit. Ea glanced up at him, looking ready to break into tears. Strangers often affected her that way, particularly male strangers, which was understandable. Easy, little one, he smiled. I think it's time for your nap. She nodded and ran away, her bare feet slapping the flagstones. Fernale smiled. A pleasant child. Yours? No, but in my care. She's a Mel. I'm not. So I see. Fernale turned to the armsman at his right and snapped his fingers. The armsman produced a bottle of wine and uncorked it with his teeth before handing it to Fernale. A drink for luck? Fernale asked, his voice making it clear it was more of a command than a question. He tilted back the bottle and drank deeply. Ger Fernale wishes you luck, friend.
Smiling thinly and wiping his hand on a purple silk handkerchief he produced from his sleeve, Fernale handed the bottle to Karl. "Enjoy." In the Aran regions, a drink for luck was a custom that was invariably followed by an introduction, whether the drinkers already knew each other or not. Typically, a drink for luck would take place between two strangers meeting on a road, the provider of the wine drinking first to assure the other it was unpoisoned. The fact that Fernale had ordered, a drink for luck in a situation where the custom wasn't really appropriate was suspicious. The fact that his armsman had an open bottle ready was more so. Karl drank deeply. The rich, fruity wine was ice-cold.
"Karl Cullinane thanks you, Baron."
Fernale's smile broadened. "So, I was wondering if it was you. In this company. It said that you travel with a hand cleric and another warrior from a land called Secaucus, not a male child and a Cathard." Secaucus was Walter's hometown, so it was only known that Karl had been traveling with Doria and Walter, which suggested that someone had seen the three of them at the cesspit when Karl had freed Elegon, or that some spell had been able to look back into that time and place. But how would anyone on this side have known that Walter came from New Jersey? Slovatsky hadn't mentioned it, as far as Karl knew. Probably Walter had mentioned it to some local at some time, and that local had talked to someone else about the stranger he had met, and someone in Pandathaway had started putting two and two together. That didn't sound good at all. Too damn many unknowns.
"There has been a price on your head for more than a year, friend Karl," Fernale said. "It seems that Pandathaway wants you."
Chak started to edge toward his sword. One of Fernale's armsmen, hand near the hilt of his short sword, moved between the little man and the tree where Chak's falchion hung. Even if Fernale meant them harm, this wasn't the right time to do something about it. The odds were poor, with the wizard right there, behind Fernale.
"Stand easy, Chak," Karl said. "Stand easy. That goes for you too," he said, holding up a palm to forestall any move by Tenedy or Fialt. "I don't think the Baron is out to collect the reward."
Fernale spread his hands. "You are wanted in Pandathaway, friend Karl. This is BM. And here we have no love for the Guild's council." He gestured at the wizard who stood behind him. "Samus, here, once was a guildmaster, studying daily in the Great Library. Today he uses his death spells to kill corn diggers. He was thrown out of the Wizards Guild, forced to flee Pandathaway."
"What'd he do? Give out a spell for free?"
Fernale cocked his head to one side, his forehead furrowed. "How did you know?" He shrugged. "In any case, it is fortunate for you that my prince is neither allied with Pandathaway nor particularly hungry for coin," he said, laying his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Even if you are as good as they say, we do have the advantage."
"That depends on how you look at it, Baron."
Ahira's voice came from the balcony above.
"About time."
Karl glanced up. Beside Ahira, little Ea stood, the spare crossbow held clumsily in her arms, leveled at one of Fernale's armsmen. Ahira held his own crossbow easily, the bolt lined up not on Fernale, but on the wizard.
"Ea can't cock the bow, but she can put out a sparrow's eye at 60 paces.
Karl suppressed a smile. Ea could probably hit a cow at 5 paces, if the cow was big enough. The little girl tried hard, but she had no talent for bowmanship at all. Ahira went on.
"And I'm not too bad with a crossbow myself. We are generally peaceable folk. How about you?"
As usual, Ahira had picked his potential target correctly. If the wizard opened his mouth to use a spell, Ahira could put a bolt through his back before the first words were fairly out. Karl folded his arms across his chest.
"You were saying, Baron?"
Fernale smiled broadly. "Again, very pretty, sir. I was saying that I must have a word with my chief man-at-arms. He didn't tell me about the others, just you. And I was also saying that you simply must be my guests at dinner, at my home. We dine at sundown, and—" Fernale let his voice trail off.
"And?"
"And as long as you break no law, harm no one, do not offend my prince, you are safe here. Within my barony, at least. You have my word on that, Karl Cullinane. And even if you're eager to try and collect the reward, you'd rather do it over my dead body than yours." Karl hesitated. If they had to take on Fernale, there probably wouldn't be a better time. but he couldn't kill everyone who might present a threat.
"We are honored, Baron, and accept."
The Baron's smile made Karl's palm itch for the feel of his saber's sharkskin hilt. Fernale gestured at the nearer of his armsmen. "Ivar will conduct you to the estate." He turned and walked away, the other armsman and the wizard at his side. "What was that all about?" Jack asked, his sword belt back around his waist. Karl shrugged.
"I think the Baron wants to know what we're up to. What I'm up to. Seems that freeing Elegon has gotten me some interesting word of mouth. It also seems that word about what we're doing hasn't gotten to BM yet.
So, how do we handle it?"
We'll see."
Karl turned to the others.
"Well, what are you all standing around for? This practice isn't over. You there, Ivar, is it? These aren't Pandathaway's games. If you want to stay around, then strip down and join in."
Sitting in the honored guest position at the foot of the long oaken table, Karl wiped his mouth and hands with a linen napkin. "Just what are you up to, Gere Fernale?" he thought. Lifting the wedge with both hands, Karl took another nibble of the sweetberry pie. He ate carefully. The dark filling was bubbly hot. "I must admit to a bit of embarrassment," Fernale said, pushing his high-backed chair away from the table. "I've never had a guest go hungry at my table before. And two?" He daubed at his mustache and the corners of his mouth with a purple silken napkin, then dropped the napkin back to his lap as the white-linened servitor at his side held out a washing bowl for his use. "I wouldn't have thought it possible," he said, drying his hands on a towel, gesturing at the servant to continue down the table to Fjallt, Tennedy, Ea, and Karl. Karl considered another helping of pie, but decided against it. Overeating any further wasn't the way to cap the best meal he'd had in months. "Whatever your flaws may be, Gere Fernale, you do set a fine table."
"Normally it wouldn't be possible, Baron,"
Karl said. A fresh wash bowl was presented to him. Karl washed the meat juices and berry stains from his fingers.
"At least as far as I can imagine."
With a slight nod and a vague frown, Fernale sat back, knitting his fingers over his belly. His face a study in concern, he cocked his head at Chak and Ahira, who sat side by side across from the others, their silver plates clean and empty in front of them. "Is there anything you would eat? Anything?" Ahira shook his head. "My apologies, Baron, but it's a religious matter. It's the fast of Saint Rita Moreno, you know. My ancestors would never forgive me if I let food or water pass my lips today." Fernale furrowed his forehead. "I must admit I'm not familiar with your faith, friend Ahira. Which warrens are you from?" The dwarf frowned at the question, as though surprised at Fernale's prying. "The Lincoln tunnels, far away." Ahira sighed, the picture of a dwarf far away from home, missing the comfortable familiarity of his own warrens. Fernale opened his mouth as though to ask just exactly where and how far away, then visibly reconsidered. Dismissing the subject with a wave and a shrug, he turned to Chak. "Surely a Cathar doesn't have religious objections to my food?" Chak glanced at Karl. For once, the little man didn't seem pleased with him. Chak didn't relish having had to pass on the Baron's fare. Platters of juice-dripping roast beef, the slices crisp, brown, and garlicky around the edges, purpley rare in the middle. Spit-roasted potatoes, so hot they had to be nibbled carefully from the end of a knife. Tiny loaves of warm, pan-baked bread, each with a dollop of sweet, icy butter at its core. Bowls of a pungent mixture of chot and burdock, sautéed together in wine and fresh garlic. It had been a delightful meal, much better than Karl had had since Pandathaway. "But I don't think we're going to trust you any too far, Baron Gere Fernale. You reek of hidden intent. Never did like people who do that." Fernale had politely sampled all of the food first. Eating from the same table as the Baron probably wasn't risky. But only probably. The cover story, such as it was, had more than a few holes in it. But for all of them to trust Fernale's food was too much of a chance. Best to keep up the pretense. Karl nodded. "My apologies," Chak said, glancing with apparently real regret at the silver platters, still well laden with food, that lay invitingly on the table.
but this Western food doesn't agree with me. Haven't been able to stomach what you eat here. I've been living on my morning meals of oat stew and greens for more 10 days than I like to recall. Oat stew? Fernell shrugged. Well, if that's what you desire. He gestured to one of his servitors, a short, plump, round-faced woman. Enna, would you? No, Jack said. Please. The Baron's face clouded over. And why not? Good question. They hadn't worked out what to say if Fernell was able to provide such a bizarre and disgusting dish. Ahira spoke up. With all due respect, you're not thinking it through, Baron. Well? If all you were able to keep down was oat stew, how eager would you be to eat more than once a day? Karl chuckled. Or even that often. He looked over at the dwarf. Nice going, Ahira. Baron? Yes? It was a wonderful meal and all. But what's this really all about? What do you mean? What I mean is this. I'm wanted in Pandathaway. There's a large reward on my head. You say you're not interested in collecting that reward. Fine, I'll accept that. The Baron lifted a razor-sharp eating knife and considered its bright edge. Although you are not convinced of it. Fernell smiled thinly. Perhaps that's wise under the circumstances. Perhaps not. He tested the edge of the knife against his thumbnail, then replaced it on the table, the point, perhaps by chance, aligned with Karl's chest. What I'm not convinced of, Karl said, is that you invite everyone who stops in the Fernell Inn into your home. And it'd be impossible to believe that you'd provide this sort of wonderful fare. I thank you, sir. Fernell inclined his head. For all the guests of the inn. It seems to me there has to be something else on your mind. Point well taken, Karl Cullinane. I do have a business proposition for you, if you are as good with that sword as your reputation suggests. I doubt I'd be interested. Would you at least listen to it, as a courtesy? Fernell stood, dropping the napkin on his chair. He lifted his sword belt from the rack next to his chair and buckled it on. Let's take a short ride together, and talk about it privately. These days I get little enough chance to ride just for the pleasure of it. Enna, see to the needs of our other guests, if you please. Karl stood and buckled on his own sword. Very well. He walked with Fernell toward the arching doorway. Ahira cleared his throat. Baron? Fernell turned, clearly irritated. Yes, friend Ahira? The dwarf steepled his hands in front of his chin. It's occurred to me that you may have a fallback position in mind, if Karl turns you down. And since you are a wise man, that fallback position is undoubtedly something terribly wise, such as wishing us well as we go on our way. And if my, as you put it, fallback position isn't so wise? Fernell gestured vaguely. As an example only, what if the alternative I present Karl Cullinane with is my taking possession of a young girl who is manifestly an escaped slave, and returning her to her proper owners? Aided by, no doubt, your full complement of 20 or so armsmen, some of whom you have stationed outside, as a precaution. No doubt. Fernell smiled. Baron, may I tell you a story? This hardly seems the occasion. Please? The dwarf smiled thinly. At least listen, as a courtesy to a guest. It's a very short story, Baron, and it might amuse you. Fernell gave in, seating himself on the empty chair next to Ahira. Since you insist. Good. Let me begin it like this. There once was a slaver named Ullman. A master of the blade, Ullman won the swords competition in Pandathaway's games every time he entered, with one exception. One man defeated him, Karl Cullinane, fighting in his first competition ever. As you perhaps can understand, Ullman resented that. Karl quelled a smile. That was true, as far as it went, but Ahira's rendition left out a few critical facts. For one thing, Ullman had been a better swordsman than Karl. Karl had won only by a judicious application of a hole in the rules of the swords competition. Ahira went on. For that reason and others, Ullman hunted our party down and caught us in the waste of El Rud. Along with a hired wizard, Ullman had 15 slavers with him, all good with their swords. Ullman put Karl, Walter Slovatsky, and me in chains. He spent a bit of time working Karl over with his fists as well. After a number of hours, we managed to break free. How? Fernale raised an eyebrow. Slavers' chains are too strong to be broken, even by a dwarf. Ahira smiled. Trick of the trade. In any case, break free we did. I managed to account for 4 of the slavers before a crossbow bolt struck me down. The wizard who was with us killed their wizard. For the sake of the injured among us, Karl put us all in a wagon and fled, leaving one of their wagons aflame and half the slavers dead. Most impressive, Fernale said, but I already knew that Karl Cullinane is a great swordsman. I'm sure you did, Baron. The dwarf inclined his head. What you didn't know is this. 8 of the slavers were alive when we fled. Ullman was among them. Ahira sighed. I wanted to leave it at that. We were away, and free and alive. We all hurt a bit. Karl had used the last of our healing draughts to save me, and Karl wasn't at his best. Having your arms chained over your head for hours leaves your shoulders weak and stiff. I wanted to call it a day, leave the slavers behind. The Baron cocked his head to one side, but Karl Cullinane didn't. The pallor of his skin belied his calm tone. No. With another of our party, Karl went back for Ullman and the rest. 2 against 8. I suppose Karl Cullinane and his companion gave a good account of themselves. Karl left 7 of them lying dead on the ground, all save Ullman. But Ullman got away. Fernale started to rise. Nevertheless, a very impressive feat. I thank you for telling me, friend Ahira. Now, Karl Cullinane, if you would walk this way. Ahira laid a hand on the Baron's arm. No, Baron. I said that he left 7 of them. He didn't leave Ullman. Karl brought Ullman's head back, as a remembrance. The dwarf removed his hand and smiled amiably. Have a nice talk. The night was bright, lit by the shimmering of the million stars flickering overhead and the score of smoking torches along the ramparts of Fernale's keep. Sitting comfortably in Carrot's saddle, Karl rode beside Fernale. The Baron was mounted on a slightly smaller, snow-white mare, whose black marking over her right eye made her look like an equine pirate. As they rode slowly along the narrow dirt road outside the keep, Fernale paused beneath each of the 4 guard stations. At each station the noble silently raised a hand to greet the watchman peering out through an embrasure, leaning lazily against a jutting stone merlin. Each guard nodded and waved in response. By the time they reached the Prince's Road, Karl was tired of Fernale's silence. Baron? Bear with me a while longer, Karl Cullinane. With a flick of the reins, he turned his horse east onto the Prince's Road, Karl following. Soon the walls of the keep were far behind. Fernale picked up the pace as they topped a hill, then started down toward a cluster of low wooden buildings, half a mile away, wisps of smoke rising from their chimneys and twisting into the night. Those are the slave quarters of my own farm, Fernale said. On both sides of the road, fields of chest-high cornstalks waved and whispered to themselves in the light breeze. I have been keeping loose security, he said, with a deep sigh. No passwords. I have a few armsmen and no soldiers at all. But that's going to have to change. Everything's going to change. Things look peaceful enough, Baron, Karl said, if you'll forgive the contradiction. If I wouldn't forgive being contradicted, would that make things look one whit less peaceful? Fernale smiled. Enough of this formality. If I may call you Karl, I would be honored if you would call me Gere. When we are by ourselves, that is. At Karl's nod, Fernale smiled, then pursed his lips, shaking his head. And it is truly said that looks can be deceiving. Do you know the Middle Lands well? Not at all. Except for some problems with the Thurangi, it's been peaceful for most of my life. And unless the Thurangi push much harder than they have been, they're not going to threaten Niffian, much less BM. It's been peaceful for a long time. For all of His Highness's reign, for that matter. His father and mine settled the boundary disputes with Niffian to the west. Our grandfathers fought Holtun. Most of His Highness's soldiers have long settled down to their farms. In all the country,
It'd be hard to find a score of BM-born men who've been blooded in combat. Displaying a shiny, well-honed sword on birthday or midsummer doesn't make a man a warrior. Fernail indicated the keep behind him with a wave of his hand. I have 40 armsmen. Only Hyvar is native to BM. His father served mine, as did his grandfather. The others are Slefmelrad too, but originally outland mercenaries. I'd thought we could grow fat and happy through my life and that of my sons. I'd thought that, and I still hope so.
But you don't believe it anymore. Karl shook his head. The reasons don't show, Baron.
Ger.
The reasons don't show, Ger. I haven't seen any signs of war or any sort of deprivation in all of BM.
Ah, you see war and deprivation as linked?
Obviously, Ger. War causes deprivation.
True, but it can be the other way around as well. Fernail pursed his lips. There is danger in wealth, even if it's only enough wealth to keep your people well fed, clothed, with perhaps a bit more to pay the cleric. What if your neighbor isn't wealthy? The border wars with Niffian started because of a 2-year case of dust blight that hit western Niffian and part of Kar. The first year they paid the spider sect to abate the blight, but barely recovered half their corn, less of their wheat, and none of their oats or barley. The second year, there was no money left for the spiders, and the Nifs tried to push their borders east into BM. By the third harvest, the war was fully underway. The Baron shook his head. I've heard tales of it. Not a pretty war. Not pretty at all.
And that's happening again?
No, not exactly. Hold up a moment. Fernail stopped his horse, then bent to pick a fist-sized stone from the road. He threw it onto the road's rough shoulder, then remounted. A different direction, a different problem. Less than a day's ride to the east, both Barony Fernail and the Principality of BM end, and Holtun and the barony of my good friend Vertum Adahan begin. And Vertum Adahan is a good friend, though I've never crossed his doorstep or he mine.
Why?
The Baron shook his head sadly. There was a blood feud between our families. Depending on which side you believe, my great-grandmother was either stolen from her husband, Baron Adahan, or left him voluntarily. The Baron took another wife, but Adahan men raided into Fernail throughout the rest of my great-grandfather's rule, and into my grandfather's.
Which side do you believe?
Fernail smiled thinly. Sir, I will have you know that I am a dutiful great-grandson. Of course great-grandmother left her husband of her own free will to go to my lecherous great-grandfather, and even insisted that he give her a room in the keep that locked only from the outside, in order to reassure him that she didn't want to go back to Adahan. He shook his head. I'll show you her room, if you'd like. You can decide for yourself. But, as I was saying, while the feud died down during my father's time, the old feelings still run deep. There are family graveyards on many of my free farmers' holdings, with tombstones that read, "Murdered by the swine Adahan." I'd hoped that in the next generation... He caught himself. But I talk too much. I hope you'll forgive me, Karl. But it's so rare that I see anyone who isn't either one of my Slefmelrad, or slaves, or a foreigner trying to grub a few extra wagon loads of corn for his coin. It's a pleasure to speak freely.
I appreciate that, Zer.
Karl didn't believe for a second that Fernail was speaking freely. The Baron was trying to gain his sympathy. Why? Was it just that Fernail didn't think he could intimidate Karl into taking on whatever job Fernail had for him? Or was there something more? As they neared the cluster of wooden shacks, each about 20 feet square, the door of the nearest swung open, and a woman and 3 children walked out, smiling and calling out greetings. Though calling them all children might have been an overstatement. The tallest was a black-haired boy of 16 or so, who looked much like a younger version of Fernail, although he was, like the other 2 children, dressed in a farmer's cotton tunic and loose drawstring pantaloons, instead of leather and wool. He ran up and took the reins of Fernail's horse in hand, gesturing to another to do the same for Carrots. Fernail dismounted, urging Karl to follow him. Karl Cullinane, it is my honor to present my eldest son, Raff, the future Baron Fernail. Raff, this is Karl Cullinane. Yes, son, the Karl Cullinane. What was the son and heir of a baron doing in the slave quarters, dressed like a peasant, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, his hands blistered? Karl didn't ask. When Fernale was ready, he'd tell Karl whatever he wanted Karl to know. Raff bowed stiffly, his eyes wide, his jaw sagging. "The outlaw, sir? Really?" An expression of awe flickered across Raff's face. Karl was uncomfortable. He'd never had to deal with a case of hero worship before. "That depends on your definition of outlaw," Karl said. "But I'm probably the one you're thinking of." "It is a pleasure to meet you, sir," Raff said, the formality of his manner in comical contrast to his humble dress and grimy face. The smallest of the children, a boy a year or so shy of Ea's age and a few inches short of her height, ran up and threw his arms around Fernale, burying his face against the Baron's waist. With a warm smile, Fernale ran his fingers through the boy's hair. "And this is Raff's brother, my son Thoman. Don't be offended at his silence, Karl. He's always shy around strangers." "Of course, Baron. I'm pleased to meet you, Raff. And you, Thoman." "Not Baron. Ger, please," the Baron said, picking Thoman up with a sweep of his arm. "This isn't a formal occasion." "Ger." The woman walked over. She looked something like a slightly younger female version of Fernale, with the same high cheekbones, though she had a more rounded jaw. Her hair was the same raven black. "Karl Cullinane," Fernale said. "My cousin, wife, and the mother of my sons. Berylyn, Lady Fernale." Fernale's voice was more formal now, carrying in it a hint of distaste, or anger, perhaps. "Karl Cullinane," she said, taking his hand in both of hers. In the light streaming through the open door, her hands were red and swollen. Some of the blisters on her fingers had broken open. "I hope you will forgive me for not greeting you at our home." "Of course, lady." He bowed over her hands. "Of course." What the hell is a baroness doing here? "And," Fernale went on, casting a quick frown at Berylyn, "the youngster holding your horse is Bren Adahan, son and heir of Vertum, Baron Adahan, of whom I have spoken." Fernale set Thoman down and walked over, clapping a hand to Bren's shoulder. "Good to see you, Bren. Is your 10-day going well?" "Very well, Baron." Raising an eyebrow to ask for permission, Bren reached up to stroke Carrot's neck the moment Karl nodded. "A fine horse, Karl Cullinane." He ran sure hands over her withers, patted at her belly and flank, then gently felt at her left rear hock. All the while, Carrot stood proudly, her head held a bit higher than normal. Her nostrils flared, as though daring Bren to find any hint or trace of a flaw. "She's Pandathaway bred, isn't she? What's her name?" "That's where I bought her, and her name is Carrot," Karl said. "I take it that you like horses." "Oh, very much." Bren was a sandy-haired boy of about Raff's age, with a broad, easy smile. "My father has a stallion I'd love to see cover her. Has she foaled yet?" "No, she's been a bit too busy to take time out for that." Like an assassin in the night, longing for Andy stabbed at him. "God, how I miss you." It was hard to think of her visibly pregnant, her belly swollen, and know that he wouldn't see her, wouldn't touch her for months, at best. In the back of his mind he could almost see her standing in front of him, hands on hips, her head cocked to one side, a whimsical smile playing over her lips. "So, who told you this hero business was supposed to be easy?" Bren went on. "If we have time later, would you listen to some advice? I think breeding Carrot with a Cathard pony might produce a—" "Your manners, Bren," Fernale said, shaking his head, a warm smile making his stern tone a lie. "You're forcing me and my guest to stand outside in the cold wind." He shivered violently, although the breeze from the north was only refreshingly cool. "Would you like to unsaddle and curry the horses, and then join us inside?" He turned to Karl. "May I, please?" "Certainly. No need to tie her. She'll stay around as long as she knows I'm inside." "Of course," Bren said disapprovingly, miffed at being told something so patently obvious. Fernale led him into the shack. It was small, but well kept. The stone floor was smooth and clean. The spaces between the wallboards had been filled with fresh clay by a careful hand.
No draught disturbed the fire that blazed merrily in the stone hearth, with its cast-iron stew-pot bubbling as it dangled over the flames. Fernail unbuckled his sword and hung it on a peg, before pulling a stool to the rough-hewn table that stood in the center of the room, beckoning Karl and the others to join him. There were only 3 remaining stools. Karl, Raff, and Tommen sat, while Berylyn stood next to her husband, frowning down at him. Fernail chuckled. "You must forgive my wife. She doesn't approve of this." "And why should I?" Berylyn sniffed. "It's nothing but nonsense, my beloved husband," she added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The Baron threw his arm around her waist and patted at her hip. "You'll forgive me, as usual." "Until the next harvest." Raff frowned. Fernail caught the expression and turned to the boy. "And none of that, not in front of our guest. You will show proper manners, boy." He gestured an apology to Karl. "This is a family tradition. Before each harvest, the sons of the Baron spend 3 10 days in the slave quarters, working the fields as hard as the slaves." "Harder, father," little Tommen piped up. "Raff says we have to show we're better." "Eating the same food, wearing the same clothes as do the field slaves. Gives a sense of proportion. Vertum thinks well enough of it that he's sent Bren to join our boys this year. I think Bren is profiting from it." "Nonsense," Berylyn said. "You should listen to your children. When Raff is the Baron, he won't put his sons through this." Fernail snorted. "Which is exactly what I said when I was his age. Karl, feel free to wander around later. You'll see that this cabin is no better than any of the others. We treat both our fealty servants and slaves well here." "This cabin is worse," Berylyn said. "You sent your men down to chip the clay out of the walls. Again." "As I will, each and every time you clay the walls for the boys. If Raff or Tommen want to do it for themselves, that's fine. I've tolerated your living with them to cook for them. Don't test my patience further." He shook his head. "Karl, my wife thinks to blackmail me into giving up the tradition, by living down here when our sons do."
"Sure. You wanted to talk about some problem?" Karl asked, uncomfortable at finding himself brought into a family argument.
"Indeed." Fernail leaned on the table, steepling his fingers in front of his face. "There have been raids into Holtun. A band of outlaws has taken up residence somewhere on the slopes of Erstein. Perhaps 200-300 of them. They ride down at night, punching through the idiotic line defense, the Holtish." He cut off as Bren opened the door. The boy shook his head sadly. "Please don't stop on my account," he said. "I don't have any delusions about Prince Uldren." Fernail smiled a thank you at the boy. "They carry off women and food, killing any who raise a hand against them. Behind them, they leave the farms ablaze, cutting the throats of all the cattle and sheep, like a dog covering with vomit that which he can't eat. It seems they've found a large cache of salt somewhere, and they have lately taken to salting the ground behind them." He shook his head. "I've talked to Samus about it, and there is nothing his magic can do. He could kill the weeds, of course, as he does for the farms in my barony, but salted land will grow no grain, whether the weeds are left standing or not. If this goes on, Holtun will find itself in the midst of a famine. To the west lies the Soda Plain. They will have to turn east. They will have to invade Biem, just as the Nifs did in my father's time. These 2 friends," he gestured at Bren and Raff, "will find themselves blood enemies, and not just in theory, but in fact."
"And you can't take on the raiders yourself?"
Karl nodded.
"Holtun wouldn't stand for it."
At the first sign of Biemi soldiers crossing into Holtun, the war would start. Already there have been a few clashes along the border. I know that this sounds disloyal, but if only the raiders had ventured into Biem, perhaps Prince Uldren would have swallowed his pride and seen the wisdom in some sort of alliance." "I doubt it, Baron." Bren shook his head. "His Highness is, as my father says, a pompous ass, and one who'd be as likely to grip his sword by the blade as by the hilt. Fancies himself a great general, though." Fernail nodded. "Karl, I'd like you to stop that. I hope you'll see that we are good people here, and we are people who are willing to pay, and pay well. Perhaps you could pretend to join the raiders, lead them into an ambush, or track them to their lair, take them on yourselves, chase them into my barony where we could deal with them, or something. Anything. Karl closed his eyes. The strategy wasn't a problem. Not Karl's problem in any case. Ahira could probably work something out. Still, 300 against 5 was not Karl's idea of good odds. Then again, they wouldn't have to take on all 300 at once. But that wasn't the issue. The question isn't can we, it's should we. And that was harder. Granted, Jer Fernail was, or at least appeared to be, a good man for this world. Given, any war between BM and Holtun would be bad for everyone concerned, including the slaves of both sides. But I'm Karl Cullinane, damn it, not Clark Kent. I can't do everything. I've already made a promise I'm not sure I can keep. I can't let other things divert me. His conscience pricked him. How about Ea? Taking her home didn't constitute carrying the war to the slavers. No, Ea's case was different. Meloe was suffering from slave raids. It was reasonable to take her home, since that path would lead to some good opportunities to strike at the Slavers' Guild. What would helping Fernail have to do with ending slavery? Anything? No, there was no connection. I'll have to turn him down. Wait. There is a price, Jer. A large one. Fernail spread his hands. We do have money, Karl. I don't really need money. But, in return for me and my friends solving your problems, would you be willing to give up all your slaves? Fernail smiled. That's a high price, Karl. It'd cost me much time and coin to replace all the slaves in my barony. Perhaps we could consider... No, not replace. Your payment would be to give up the owning of slaves throughout your barony, forever. For a moment, the Baron's face was a study in puzzlement. Then Fernail sighed. I thank you for the politeness of not turning me down directly, but it wasn't necessary. I understand. You don't want to make our battles yours. Baron, I'm completely serious. Please, don't insult my intelligence. Fernail held up a hand. Let it be, Karl Cullinane. Let it be. Karl opened his mouth, then closed it. It wouldn't work. To Fernail, the concept of slavery was so normal that he couldn't take at face value any suggestion that he give up owning people. It wasn't really offensive to Fernail, just incomprehensible. But trying to explain further could only be an affront. Fernail's face grew grim. I'd thought to try and frighten you into serving me, you know. Threatening to hold that little girl, Ea, is it? As hostage against your success. He drummed his fingers on the wood. You do seem to care about her welfare. That wouldn't leave me any choice, Baron. Fernail nodded. Then, no choice at all. I'd either have to take on 300 raiders, relying on your word to release Ea if I did, or I'd have to take on you and your 40 or 50 armsmen, none of whom seem to have done much recent fighting. Karl let his hand fall to the hilt of his sword. That would be an easy decision, Baron. Granted, my friends and I would probably all die, but we'd take some of you with us. And how would that leave you in the war that's coming? It was just a thought, but a silly one. He sighed deeply. The sort of warrior I need wouldn't be frightened into doing something unwillingly. The Baron shook his head as he rose to his feet and walked to the peg where his sword hung. But as your friend Ahira put it, I have prepared a fallback position. A ruler, even a lowly baron, should always keep an option ready. Baron, you... Fernail lifted the scabbard and drew the sword. Karl leapt away from the table, sending his stool clattering to the floor. Drawing his own sword with one fluid motion, he spun around into a crouch. Gotta be careful. Can't let the woman or the children get behind me. They might grab my sword arm. The sword held loosely in his hand, Fernail drew himself up straight. Karl Cullinane, he said, his voice dripping with scorn. Put up your sword. You are in no danger here, not from me. I swear that on my life, sir. What the hell was going on? First Fernail had tried to buy his services, then intimidate him. Then he had gotten ready to attack Karl. I don't understand. Karl lowered the point of his sword. On my life, sir, the Baron repeated. To hell with it. I've got to trust somebody sometime.
Karl slipped his sword back into its scabbard. The Baron turned to Roth. "Hold out your hands, boy." Silently, Roth shook his head. "Do it!" The Baron's shout left Karl's ears ringing. Slowly, Roth extended his palms. With exquisite gentleness, Fernail laid the flat of the blade on the boy's palms, then untied his pouch from his own waist. Carefully, Fernail tied the leather strands about the middle of the blade. "There are 10 pieces of Pandathway gold here." White-faced, Barrowland laid a hand on Fernail's arm. "Don't do this. He's just a boy." Fernail closed his eyes. "This gives us a chance. Just a chance, Barra. If Roth survives, he may be strong enough to see the barony through the coming years, through the war. I don't see any other way. Please don't make this any harder." He opened his eyes and turned back to Karl, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Karl Cullinane, I offer my eldest son to you as apprentice, sir, to learn the way of the sword, bow, and fist. I offer as payment my horse, this gold, this sword, and the services of my son, for a period of 5 years." Karl looked down at Roth. The boy's whitened face was unreadable. "Roth?" "It's not his choice, Karl. I'm the boy's father." Karl didn't look at Fernail. "Hush. Roth, do you want to be my apprentice?" Clenching his lower lip between his teeth until the blood flowed, Roth looked from his mother to his father and back to Karl. Slowly, he walked over and extended the sword and pouch, his arms shaking. "It's my father's wish, sir."
"But is it yours?"
Roth looked from his father, to his brother, to his mother, to Bren. Hero worship was one thing. Agreeing to leave his home and family was another. Bren nodded. "Do it. If you stay, we'll soon be enemies. Be after each other's blood." "And if I go? Will that make any difference?" "I don't know. But it'll give us 5 years' grace. 5 years until I have to kill you, or you have to kill me." Bren clapped a hand to Roth's shoulder, gripping tightly. 5 years, at least." Roth swallowed. Then, "Yes. Will you accept me as apprentice, Karl Cullinane?" Karl looked at Baron Ger Fernail with a new sense of admiration. It took a certain something for a man to see his own limitations, to accept the likelihood of his own destruction, while planning to protect at least a part of his family from the storm of arrows and swords that would certainly leave him dead. Not necessarily just part of his family. Perhaps Fernail had other plans for Thaumann and Lady Barallan. Apprenticing Roth to an outlaw was a cold-blooded act, but that didn't make it wrong. If Roth survived an apprenticeship, he might be strong enough to hold the barony, perhaps even all of BM, together through the coming year. And what if he dies, Ger Fernail? We're heading into danger. What if he's not quick enough or lucky enough to live through it? Karl didn't voice the question. The answer was clear. If Roth couldn't survive a 5-year apprenticeship, then he wasn't the ruler that the barony needed. Ger Fernail would either have a worthy successor or a dead son. Not a pleasant gamble. But what other choice do they have? Karl accepted the sword and pouch on the palms of his hands. "I accept you, Roth, as my apprentice. Spend some time saying goodbye to your family and friends. We leave in the morning. Oh, and you can sleep at the inn if you'd prefer." He untied the pouch from the sword, then accepted the scabbard from the Baron. "I'd rather stay." "You're his apprentice, boy." Fernail's low voice was almost an animal snarl. "You will sleep at the inn." Karl drew himself up straight. "I'll thank you not to interfere with my apprentice, Baron. I gave him the choice, not you." He took 2 copper coins from his pouch and dropped them on the rough table. "This should cover his lodging. He'll spend the night here, as he chooses." Slipping the sword into the scabbard, Karl handed it to the boy. "Take good care of this, Roth. You're going to be spending many hard hours learning to use it." "And may God have mercy on your soul." The boy nodded somberly. "But I think you'll do just fine." A smile peeked through Roth's tears.
and through Fernails. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 9. With every step, Karl and his friends find themselves more and more entangled in all the worries and cares of the world. First, with Aya and needing to take her home, and now with Raph and the apprenticeship. Hopefully they don't find those entanglements weighting them down too much, because in the background, they've picked up a pursuit they can't lose, and an enemy who might just be the end of them. If you enjoyed this installment, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or leaving a comment about what you liked or didn't like. I'm always happy to respond to comments, and it would be good fun to discuss the story as it moves along from chapter to chapter. Thank you once again for listening, and have a good night.